I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. I'm Forgiveness Willie, teaching forgiveness from the Ozarks, here for Lesson 31 in A Course in Miracles. We're reading from the Foundation for Inner Peace version of Course in Miracles for Lesson 31 here on Friday, January the 31st of 2025. I am not the victim of the world I see. Today's idea is the introduction to your declaration of release. The introduction to your declaration of release. I am not the victim of the world I see. Again, the idea should be applied to both the world you see without and the world you see within. In applying the idea, we will use a form of practice which will be used more and more with changes as indicated. Generally speaking, the form includes two aspects. One in which you apply the idea on a more sustained basis, and the other consisting of frequent applications of the idea throughout the day. Two longer practice periods with the idea for today are needed, one in the morning and one at night. 3 to 5 minutes for each of these are recommended. During that time, look about you slowly while repeating the idea 2 or 3 times. Then close your eyes and apply the same idea to your inner world. You will escape from both together. For the inner is the cause of the outer. The inner world is the cause of the outer world. As you survey your inner world, merely let whatever thoughts cross your mind come into your awareness, each to be considered for a moment and then replaced by the next thought. Try not to establish any kind of hierarchy among them. Watch them come and go as dispassionately as possible. Do not dwell on any one in particular, but try to let the stream move on evenly and calmly without any special investment on your part. As you sit and quietly watch your thoughts, repeat today's idea to yourself as often as you care to, but with no sense of hurry. I am not the victim of the world I see. So he's really teaching us a really wonderful method of thought observation in that paragraph 3. And I'd encourage you to maybe read that again right before you sit down quietly to do this morning and evening meditation, this can truly be called a meditation, even though he still calls it a practice period. In addition, repeat the idea for today as often as possible during the day. Remind yourself that you are making a declaration of independence in the name of your own freedom. Wow, we're making a declaration of independence in the name of our own freedom. Freedom from our debilitating thoughts. Remind yourself that you're making a declaration of independence in the name of your own freedom, and in your freedom lies the freedom of the world. The idea for today is also a particularly useful one to use as a response to any form of temptation that may arise. It is a declaration that you will not yield to it and put yourself in bondage. The idea for today is also a particularly useful one to use as a response to any form of temptation that may arise. Something that kind of disturbs you, something you're kind of afraid of going to happen. You can use this. Well, I'm not a victim of the world I see. I must be seeing this wrong. Okay? So you can use it for that. It is a declaration that you will not yield to the temptation and put yourself in bondage. Okay? And maybe we'll do do a little short one when we close. But for now, let's go take a look at our text reading for today. The ego-body illusion. And this is in chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego, section 5, the ego-body illusion. All things work together for good. What a beautiful statement. Of course, that's lifted from something Paul said in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. All things work together for good. Now, it goes on in Romans 8:28, and it adds a little more to that. And I think he's going to address that here. It says in there in Romans 8:28, which is one of my favorite. I used it when my first wife, the mother of my 6 children, crossed over in a car wreck abruptly, and I was left taking care of 6 little kids that were all 10 years old and down to 10 months old, and I became a Mr. Mom, and I needed some help. But you know what I trusted on? It was before I'd really, as a matter of fact, I'd got the Course in Miracles that very day. We'd got it. We were so excited about studying it together. But I hadn't learned these principles in A Course in Miracles when I processed through that. But I did hang on to Romans 8:28, particularly that first phrase. All things work together for good. And I thought, well, I don't see how it's happening, but somehow this is a good thing. And I just hung out there through the tears. All things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. Now let me tell you the whole quote in Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. So basically, those who love God and are trying to do his will can rest assured that all things work together for good. Now that's the way the Bible, where Paul said it. But Jesus reduces it and he says, actually all things work together for good, period. God's always the unseen hand that's making everything happen perfectly. And you can rest in that and trust in that. That's what he's wanting you to know. All things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. The ego exerts maximal vigilance about what it permits into awareness, and this is not the way a balanced mind holds together. The ego is thrown further off balance because it keeps its primary motivation from your awareness and raises control rather than sanity to predominance. Control rather than sanity. The ego has every reason to do this, according to the thought system which gave rise to it and which it serves. Sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego and must be obliterated by the ego in the interest of its self-preservation. So the ego wants to preserve itself, and the only way it can do it is to not let you think sanely. He wants to keep you stirred up, so the ego stays alive. Paragraph 2. A major source of the ego's off-balance state is its lack of discrimination between the body and the thoughts of God. Thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. The ego, therefore, either distorts them, the thoughts of God, it either distorts them or refuses to accept them. It cannot, however, make them cease to be. It therefore tries to conceal not only unacceptable body impulses, but also the thoughts of God, because both are threatening to it. Unacceptable body impulses and also the thoughts of God are both threatening to the ego. Being concerned primarily with its own preservation in the face of threat, the ego perceives them as just a minute, I lost my page. The ego, okay, let's back up. Thoughts of God thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. The ego, therefore, either distorts them or refuses to accept them. It cannot, however, make them cease to be. It therefore tries to conceal not only unacceptable body impulses, but also the thoughts of God, because both are threatening to it. Being concerned primarily with its own preservation in the face of threat, the ego perceives them as the same. Next sentence 7. By perceiving them as the same, the ego attempts to save itself from being swept away, as it would surely be in the presence of knowledge. An illusion that keeps itself alive by being an illusion. Paragraph 3. Any thought system that confuses God and the body must be insane. Wow, catch that. Any thought system that confuses God and the body must be insane. Yet this confusion is essential to the ego, which judges only in terms of threat or non-threat to itself. In one sense, the ego's fear of God is at least logical, since the idea of Him does dispel the ego. The idea of God dispels the ego. But fear of the body, with which the ego identifies so closely, makes no sense at all. Paragraph 4. The body is the ego's home by its own election. It is the only identification with which the ego feels safe, since the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. The body is the ego's home by its own election. It is the only identification with which the ego feels safe, since the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly, that you're vulnerable. Wow, that's why we're trying to backwash the system with our ideas. Today, a really prime one in recognition of this idea: I am not the victim of the world I see. A declaration of your Declaration of Independence in the name of your own freedom and the freedom of the world. Okay, it is the only identification with which the ego feels safe, since the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly, yet the ego hates the body because it cannot accept it as good enough to be its home. Here is where the mind becomes actually dazed. Being told by the ego that it is really part of the body and that the body is its protector, the mind is also told that the body cannot protect it. Therefore, the mind asks, "Where can I go for protection?" To which the ego replies, "Turn to me." The mind, and not without cause, reminds the ego that it has itself insisted that it is identified with the body, so there is no point in turning to it for protection. The ego has no real answer to this because there is none, but it does have a typical solution. Now, before I go on and talk about what is the ego's solution for this dichotomy or this problem that the mind asks and its splitness, choosing between God and the ego, he says that he has a solution that he uses. But what I wanted to bring our attention to before I went on to the solution is just the way the mind works, and that we are so blessed that we have this book that helps us to really know the way that we think at a level that's below what most of us are conscious of. But we can become conscious of it. He's telling us what we do. You can sit still and quiet and look at your thoughts go by, which you're learning to do with your lesson for today. So be sure to do those 3 to 5 minute practice periods. You might even read this paragraph 4 again, and the paragraph, I think it was paragraph 4 in our workbook lesson too. Both of them will have a lot of what to do with your eyes closed in the inner world. Okay, so anyway, the ego has no real answer to this because there is none, but it does have a typical solution. It obliterates the question from the mind's awareness. Once out of awareness, the question can and does produce uneasiness, but it cannot be answered because it cannot be asked. Paragraph 5. So it keeps your mind all busy thinking about other things. Okay? And he's going to develop that a little more. This is the question that must be asked. Where can I go for protection? Seek and ye shall find does not mean that you should seek blindly and desperately for something you would not recognize. And of course, he's quoting something that he had said, recorded in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 and 8. Seek and ye shall find. Ask and the door shall, ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened, is what it says there in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 and 8, which was Jesus talking on the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, meaningful seeking is consciously undertaken, consciously organized, and consciously directed. We want to be aware, don't we? The goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. Learning and wanting to learn are inseparable. You learn best when you believe what you're trying to learn is of value to you. However, not everything you may want to learn has lasting value. Indeed, many of the things you want to learn may be chosen because their value will not last. And the last paragraph, 6. Anyway, I do want to, one more thing, when it says the ego has no real answer to this, but it does have a typical solution. It obliterates the question from the mind's awareness. Once out of awareness, the question can and does produce uneasiness, but it cannot be answered because it cannot be asked. Be aware that one of the distracting mechanisms of the ego is to keep you always churned up, getting your mind here and going there, being busy, having things you have to do. You sit down to meditate, and all of a sudden you get a big list of things you need to go do to keep you from actually sitting still and being quiet. That's probably, oftentimes, that's the ego's way of keeping itself unknown to you, and therefore functioning in your mind. You're the life giver to it, but you withdraw your support when you realize what it offers you, and not happiness. Okay, last paragraph. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. And if you're one of those new meditators and you sit down quietly and you do get a bunch of flood of thoughts, have you a pen and paper set beside you and write down the stuff that you want to think about, so you don't have to be worried about, I need to remember that. Because you may do have some legitimate things that you haven't been stopping long enough to give your mind the opportunity to remember. So you may have a whole bunch of things you need to do that are just below your consciousness, that the first thing that comes up is all these things you need to do. So if that's your case, don't let that pull you away from doing your 3 to 5 minutes at this point. Instead, just write it down, what you need to give a thought to, and then dismiss it. And when you're done, you can be about your Father's business and do those things that you had realized that were undone, that needed done. Okay, last paragraph, 6. The ego thinks it is an advantage not to commit itself to anything that is eternal, because the eternal must come from God. Eternalness is the one function the ego has tried to develop, but has systematically failed to achieve. The ego compromises with the issue of the eternal, just as it does with all issues touching on the real question in any way. By becoming involved with the tangential issues, it hopes to hide the real question and keep it out of mind. That's what we were talking about. The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is for precisely that purpose, to keep itself from being seen. Preoccupation with problems set up to be incapable of solution are favorite ego devices for impeding learning progress. In all these diversionary tactics, however, the one question that is never asked by those who pursue them is, what for? What for? This is the question that you must learn to ask in connection with everything. What for? What is the purpose? Whatever it is, it will direct your efforts automatically. When you make a decision of purpose, then you have made a decision about your future effort, a decision that will remain in effect unless you change your mind. Okay, so we want to start learning to ask, what for? What do I need to do that for? What do I need to think that for? Why do I need to do that? Why? What for? and he says, ask it in relation to everything. Okay, let's see what we've got here going on around the world. It's Amartitha, which is Mir Baba Remembrance Day, who is an Indian mystic and spiritual leader, claimed to be an avatar of God. It's also my first guru, at least I think of my grandpa, Bernard Julius Hebink. It's his birthday. He was born in Indian Territory in 1906. Thank you, BJ. Thank you, Grandpa, for all the things you taught me. Well, we all have those people, grandparents, oftentimes were those that really took an interest and taught us things that we're still living by. So thank you very much, Grandpa. Appreciate your Social Security check day. Backward day, do everything backward, kind of a fun holiday. Eat Brussels sprouts day, those little small cabbages, little mini cabbages, Brassica oleracea. It's good time to start them indoors. All your cold weather plants, you can get started indoors and have them ready to go out in April. 16 to 20 weeks before last frost is when a lot of things you can start planting. And so, I told you the other day, you start planting your peppers and tomatoes. Anyway, of course, you don't want to put them out as early as Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts, you probably put them out, around here in Zone 6, probably put them out 1st of April, even in March. Getting any really cold spells, it could hurt them. Want to harden them off a little bit and get them used to the cold. Hug an Economist Day. An economist I like to listen to is Richard Wolff, and just by Inspire Your Heart with Art Day. International Zebra Day. They're related to the horse, the equus. And there's 3 species that I found: the Grevy's, the Gaga, and the zebra. Different species of the zebra. Fun at Work Day, and that ought to be every day, to have fun at work. If you're not having fun, get a new job. Hot Chocolate Day, the Theobromine Cacao Day. Seth Day. I was thinking about Jane Robertson. Seth Speaks, the book she wrote, and the man that there's a lot of good wisdom in those Seth books. Nauru Independence Day. It's a Pacific island that became independent on this day in 1968. Scotch Tape Day, created by Richard Thru in 1930. He was trying to find a way to two-tone auto painting, and he came up with Scotch tape. Street Children Day. That's all to help the children, obviously. And then out of edible landscaping, the Celeste fig, the Ficus carica, and let's see what it says about the Celeste fig. Celeste is also known in the South as the sugar fig. A Southern tradition, long-lived and hardy, Celeste reputation comes from many generations of people that have grown this fig. The eye at the bottom of the fruit is small, keeping insects out. Fruit's main crop early on the last year's wood, space 10-foot circles in zone 7 and 12-foot circles further south. And it says it'll grow in zone 6, but if it produces on last year's wood, that means you have to keep that from being too damaged. So if it gets frost too hard, it may not do well. Okay, well, let's close. Hey, you know what? I said we were going to, I reckon, do we have enough time? I think we have just enough time to have a little short meditation, and I will sing as we do. And you guys keep in mind as you survey your inner world, merely let whatever thoughts cross your mind come into your awareness, each to be considered for a moment and then replaced by the next. Try not to establish any kind of hierarchy among them. Watch them come and go as dispassionately as possible. Do not dwell on any one in particular, but try to let the stream move on evenly and calmly without any special investment on your part. As you sit and quietly watch your thoughts, repeat today's idea to yourself as often as you care to, but with no sense of hurry. No sense of hurry. Okay, why don't you have just a little quiet time right now and we have one of our little meditations. I'm not the victim of the world I see. You can close your eyes or you can look around saying, I'm not the victim of the world I see. That's what he said to do. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. Then close your eyes and say, I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. Look about you while repeating the idea. Then close your eyes and apply the idea to your inner world. So close your eyes and apply the idea to your inner world. You will escape from both together. You will escape from the inner and the outer world together. For the inner is the cause of the outer. For the inner world is the cause of the outer world. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. Remind yourself that you are making a declaration of independence in the name of your own freedom. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. I'm not the victim of the world I see. And our word for peace today is from Polish, Pokoj. So Pokoj be with you. Peace be with you. I am not the victim of the world I see. Pokoj.